My love affair with Middlesbrough FC begins in the 1800s with great-grandpa Bob, who was born in Middlesbrough in 1897. Great-grandma Alice was born the following year in nearby Saltburn by the sea. While Middlesbrough built steel, Saltburn looked out across the North Sea. A Victorian seaside resort with elegant hotels, a pier and one of the steepest cliff lifts in Britain. Bob worked in steelmaking in Skinning Grove and rose into senior management. In 1920, he and Alice married and settled in Hilda Place, Saltburn. 2 years later, my grandpa was born. Growing up between Saltburn and Middlesbrough, sport quickly became one of the great loves of his life. As a boy, he would travel to Ayresome Park to watch Middlesbrough from the workhouse end, later known as the famous Holgate end. After matches, he'd visit his Auntie Lil in Ayresome Street for a custard slice. The remarkable thing was that Auntie Lil never actually attended the games, she simply listened from home. By the time he arrived at her house, she already knew the score from the noise of the crowd. One of his friends from Saltburn was a local lad called George Hardwick. George would captain both Middlesbrough and England and become one of the most respected defenders the English game has ever produced. It was always a nice moment to visit Mr. Hardwick's statue with Grandpa outside the riverside. For my grandpa, though, there was only ever one footballer, Wilf Mannion. Born in South Bank, Middlesbrough, a local hero, a genius with a football. No matter who came afterwards, Pele, Maradona, Juninho, or even Johnny Howson, Grandpa always insisted that Wilfie Mannion was the finest footballer who had ever lived. For my grandpa and millions like him, the world changed when he was 17. Grandpa went to war. He served in the Royal Signals as a wireless operator. Grandpa was stationed in Algeria and also saw action in southern Italy during the Battle of Monte Cassino. This photograph was taken in Pompeii in 1944. The world around him was still at war, but for a brief moment he stood amongst some of the oldest ruins in Europe, thousands of miles from the football grounds and streets of Teesside. Here's another photograph from that same year. Grandpa aged 22, his sister Joan, her RAF fiancé Doug, and my great-grandmother standing outside the family home in Hilda Place. Within a few years, though, everything would change again. After the war, Grandpa trained as a teacher. Eventually, he decided he wanted to see more of the world. According to family legend, he flipped a coin. One side Australia, the other Canada. Canada won. With little more than $100 in his pocket, he left England behind and headed west. These photographs were taken during those first years. The blast furnaces of Teesside were replaced by mountains. Industrial skylines gave way to forests, lakes, and endless open roads. For a man who had spent 5 years of his life surrounded by war, it must have felt like genuine freedom. And Grandpa embraced it completely. He loved teaching. Here he is in a one-room teacherage in British Columbia's remote Peace District. The town of Rolla, close to the Alberta border, probably could not have been any more different from post-war Teesside. My grandpa absolutely loved big American cars. This is his Rambler, the car he used to drive south to California and camp beneath the desert stars near Palm Springs. Teaching in remote communities across British Columbia, he also introduced generations of Canadian children to something they had never heard of before, Middlesbrough Football Club. Baseball became part of his life too, although as a lifelong cricketer, he never quite understood why anyone needed such a large glove to catch a ball. But then, given these photos of my grandpa playing for the now globally infamous Saltburn Cricket Club, maybe using a large glove could catch on. When I look at these photographs, what strikes me most is how happy he looks. Relaxed, content, at peace. The contrast between wartime Europe and post-war Canada must have been extraordinary. You can almost see the freedom in these pictures. These photographs show Vancouver as he first knew it. The Granville Street Bridge, downtown Vancouver, the North Shore Mountains, and the Lions Gate Bridge. Today, the city looks very different. Slightly over 500,000 people lived in Vancouver when Grandpa first arrived. Millions of people now call Vancouver home, but when I look at these pictures, I still see the city through Grandpa's eyes. A place of opportunity, adventure, and new beginnings. These are Grandpa's pictures of the Lionsgate Bridge, built thanks in part to the Guinness family, more famous for their beer than bridges. Little could he have imagined, though, that 70 years later, his grandson would return here through football. I'll get more into that in my part of my football inheritance story, but it blows me away that the bridge my grandpa photographed in the 1950s has changed so little in just over 70 years. This photo was taken by Grandpa on Jericho Beach on Vancouver's west side. 63 years later, here I am standing on the very same beach with two teammates from AFC Hertfordshire on a football tour, just a little bit more foreshadowing of what's to come in this film. My dad was born in Lionsgate Hospital, North Vancouver in the 1970s to my grandpa from Saltburn in North Yorkshire and my grandmother who came from Reading in the south of England. This is the earliest photograph I could find of him wearing a Middlesbrough shirt. The shirt came from Jack Hatfield's sports shop on Boro Road, a famous name in Middlesbrough sporting history. Dad was back visiting his mum's side of the family, a stone's throw away from Reading Football Club's Elm Park, and he's always said that when he first became conscious of football and meaning and family, Boro and Reading were both in Division 4, but he chose Boro because of Grandpa. Like most Canadian kids, Dad grew up with a hockey stick in his hands. Road hockey in the street, road hockey in the driveway, road hockey whenever he could. But football was always his first love, and that part came from Grandpa. Summer football camps became a regular feature of life. The eagle-eyed amongst you might spot a particularly stylish pair of Adidas Argentinas. Football fashion peaked early. As a youngster, Dad played all over British Columbia. Here he is with Grandpa just before losing a cup final, something I'm not sure he's recovered from yet. Dad grew up playing in all weathers, catching local media interest and on all surfaces that looked very similar to Loftus Road and Kenilworth Road of the time. In this photo, my dad's in the grey and I can hear him telling me how easy it was to defend against this player from Vancouver Metro because he clearly can't use his left foot. And that probably explains why Dad's favourite Boro players have always been two-footed. Here's a team photo from the 83-84 season. My dad's in there somewhere. Like most youth team photos from the 80s, the players look reasonably normal, while the coaches appear to have lost a bet. However, this coach, who played for Aberdeen in the 70s, had one of the fittest sides my dad ever played for. This photograph is football perfection. A classic night kit, the North Shore Pegasus. Dad reckons it was one of the best teams he ever played for, although he doesn't miss having to cross the Lionsgate Bridge every week to get there. The high point of his football career came in 1989. That year he travelled to Shizuoka, Japan, to represent Canada at the SBS Cup, which in 2026 held its 49th competition. Canada faced Japan, South Korea, and the reigning world champions Brazil. Canada were the only team to score against Brazil during the tournament, twice. Apparently, the score was respectable at half-time. The second half is spoken about rather less frequently, though. What I do know is that Dad picked up a yellow card against Brazil, which, in our family at least, is spoken about with approximately the same reverence as winning the tournament itself. Cafu was playing for Brazil that day. Dad has wondered since if he's thought about him while winning his 2 World Cups, the Champions League, 2 Scudettos, the UEFA Super Cup, the Brazilian League, the Copa Libertadores, the Recopa Sudamericana, and the European Cup Winners' Cup. Here's the obligatory Team Canada photograph taken naturally in a Japanese car park. One of the players in that photograph remains a close family friend to this day, a Glasgow Rangers supporter who is a season ticket holder at Ibrox despite living in British Columbia. He occasionally joins us at Middlesbrough matches when he's in England. In his words, football, always the glue, bringing people together and keeping them in your life forever. Which brings us neatly back to Middlesbrough. Here's Dad at Ayresome Park back in England visiting family in the Martin area of Middlesbrough. According to him, he and his mates simply wandered through the gates and onto the pitch. Nobody stopped them, nobody questioned them, a different era. Ayresome Park was demolished 4 years after this photograph was taken, so it's a photo that has a very special place in the family collection. My first Middlesbrough match came when I was 6 years old. Dad and Grandpa took me to the Riverside. Middlesbrough against Crystal Palace. Boro won 2-1. I don't really remember much about the football, but I do remember the noise from Boro's red faction in the stands, the flags, the anticipation, the feeling that something important was happening, and that was enough. I was hooked. And football continued to create memories. Like most kids, I spent countless hours kicking a ball around. I also had a younger brother willing to cheat whenever necessary. This footage is Exhibit A, an egg and spoon race that somehow ended in victory for me and Matt. Not because we deserved it, but because one incredibly patient teenager allowed it to happen. And that teenager was Emile Smith-Rowe. He was with Arsenal under-14s during this race, just a remarkably kind young footballer making 2 small boys very happy. Here I am doing Yaya Touré's dance at him as he arrived to play Barcelona in the Champions League. Lucky for him, I'd been selected to be a ball boy that evening. A young Middlesbrough supporter standing alongside some of the biggest footballers on the planet. Barcelona, Manchester City, the Champions League anthem, an unforgettable night. Jordi Alba may well have tried to convince me to support Barcelona. If he did, he was wasting his time. I was already committed. The next day, Ben Gibson would be sent off for Boro, Troy Deeney would score a penalty, and Middlesbrough would lose at Vicarage Road on their way to finishing 12th under Ita Karanka.
William, just want to wish you a happy birthday, and I hope you enjoy your day and I hope you have a lovely time.
Getting a message from prime Liverpool Daniel Sturridge threatened to turn my head. After all, he scored 21 goals for Liverpool in the Premier League that season. Chris Wilder also took time to wish me a happy 16th birthday.
Afternoon, Will. It's Chris Wilder, manager of Middlesbrough Football Club. Hope you're well, pal. Just a quick message to wish you a happy 16th birthday. Hope you have a fabulous day.
Football has given us plenty of moments like that over the years, but the biggest memories have always involved Middlesbrough and family. My first trip to Wembley came in 2015. The build-up was incredible. My brother Matt and I made homemade Patrick Bamford signs. And 2 years later, we got a golden retriever and we named him Bamford. Dad spent what felt like an eternity trying to secure tickets. I'm fairly sure I learned a few new words while listening to him navigate the booking system. We travelled down full of hope, full of excitement, and judging by these photographs, full of TGI Fridays. There we are on Wembley Way, me, Matt and Grandpa, ready for the biggest match of our lives. Unfortunately though, Norwich City were ready as well. But that defeat didn't make me love Middlesbrough less. If anything, it made me love the club more. There were Christmases receiving FA Cup tickets, new shirts, pyjamas, and selfies like this with Marvin Johnson, a player generous enough to spend a little time with a starstruck supporter. Those moments really matter in football. At this time, I became fully conscious of what Middlesbrough Football Club really represented, and a lot of that happened under Neil Warnock. Football needs characters, and there aren't many bigger characters than Colin. Eventually came the away days, lots of away days. Dad, Matt and me. The three of us setting off around the country following Middlesbrough. One of the highlights was always seeing where the club photographer Tom Banks had spotted us. This one was at Ibrox. Back when many of us thought Rob Edwards was doing a wonderful job. Our football opinions can change so quickly, just ask Rangers supporters about Russell Martin. I absolutely love away days, Fratton Park, talking football with fellow supporters, saying hello to Youssef, another Boro supporter from the south of England. My grandpa rated Portsmouth's post-war goal machine Jack Froggatt. He's always spoken fondly of Portsmouth as a result. And don't get me wrong, I always want 3 points down there, but I've inherited that soft spot too. They're not Norwich City. Then came Old Trafford, 9,500 Middlesbrough supporters, Cristiano Ronaldo missing a penalty, Matt Crooks scoring, Anthony Elanga missing, and Middlesbrough knocking Manchester United out of the FA Cup. What a night. Loftus Road gave us another unforgettable moment. Marcus Fors scoring his first goal for the club. Absolute limbs in the away end, and Loftus Road is another classic Championship away day. Kenilworth Road was always one I looked out for, partly because it's close to home, partly because I played for Luton as a youngster, and nowhere else in football looks quite like it. While I'm not sure I'd want 1,500 away supporters admiring my linen collection and having a nose at my upstairs loo and the top secret products to make my hair look as good as it does, there's something really magical about this ground.
We're fucking shit! We're fucking shit! We're fucking shit! We're fucking shit! We're fucking shit!
And Portman Road is another proper away day. It would have been even better if Matt Clark had scored this chance. But that's football. And then to Craven Cottage, thousands of Middlesbrough supporters packed into the Putney end. And then, 11 years after my first trip, Wembley again. Another Championship playoff final. Our fantastic young Swedish manager Kim Hellberg gave us hope despite Hayden Hackney's injury. No homemade Patrick Bamford signs this time, just a collection of Middlesbrough shirts drying in the garden. We followed the crowd to the Green Man, got the pints in, said hello to friends and nodded to people I recognised from away days up and down the country and joined in with the singing. It doesn't really get much better than that. Dad managed to secure tickets again, a miracle that deserves far more recognition than it receives. Remember that Rangers supporting season ticket holder from the Japanese car park photograph in 1989? Well, here he is, 35 years later, at Wembley, with his daughter, with our family, supporting Middlesbrough. Football, eh? What are the chances? The result, though, was typical Middlesbrough. Heartbreak, again. But we all know that football isn't just about winning. Not entirely. It's about the away days, the people, the memories, and the stories you take home afterwards. Football. It really is the glue. So back to the start. Here's me as a newborn with my grandpa. And one of my earliest football memories isn't actually football at all. It's simply that there was always a football around. In the garden, in the house, in the car. Wherever we went, always a ball. Trips to Saltburn with Mum carrying our coats. Me and Matt in our new Boro tops from the club shop. Bamford throwing himself at the North Sea and ingesting much of it every time. And stopping for lunch at the Ship Inn. And here's me in my first Middlesbrough shirt. I've still got that shirt somewhere, probably in a box in the loft. Football shirts are funny things, you never really throw them away. They're memories as much as they are clothes. And then there was Canada. Always Canada. This photograph was taken during one of my first visits. Camping in the shoe swap with family friends. The country meant so much to my grandpa, and from my very first trip I could understand why. The scenery, the people, the sense of space, the kindness. Canada always felt familiar, even when it was thousands of miles from home. And because football appears absolutely everywhere, the gentleman standing between my dad and grandpa in this photograph once played for Bristol Rovers. Somehow football finds a way into every story. And so, after all those years of hearing stories about Canada, I finally had the chance to experience it for myself. When I was 16, shortly after finishing my GCSEs, I travelled to Vancouver on a football tour with AFC Hertfordshire. If someone had told me there was only one seat left and I'd have to paddle across the Atlantic to get there, I'd probably have given it serious consideration. For me, one of the proudest moments of the trip came when I captained the side against TSS Rovers Academy. I scored 2 in that game, and here's one of them. A real proud moment for me, and I can't even imagine how it felt for my dad. One photograph from our family archive has always stood out to me. Back in 1989, my dad was photographed alongside 2 young Japanese players during the SBS Cup. And 33 years later, I found myself representing my own side in Canada. And in our final match of the tour, against Team Canada, I helped set up our equaliser in a 3-3 draw. Here it is. And now somehow, here we are again. It's World Cup 2026. Vancouver is one of the host cities. BC Place Stadium sits in the heart of a city that meant so much to my grandpa and my dad. A city that's become part of my own story too. And I've been there before. In 2022, my teammates and I watched the Vancouver Whitecaps beat LAFC with a dramatic late winner. Canada's World Cup goalkeeper Maxime Crepeau was playing that day. And Boro's US men's national team midfielder Sebastian Berhalter had just joined the club. At the time, it was just another brilliant football memory, but now it feels like something more, because 4 years later, I headed back to Vancouver during the World Cup itself, not as a tourist, not as a player, but to tell stories, to meet people, and share my experiences with football supporters around the world. And I was there working on behalf of the official Chinese rights holder. Vancouver showed what a great city it is. It was really cool seeing people from all over the world come together to watch football. Playing a couple of games of Summer League football with the son of one of my dad's mates was a real highlight. Well, it was until he just decided to get sent off. And slaying the dragon that is the Lionsgate Bridge and making sure I didn't break down this time under my own steam. With a new mate I met playing football who supports Blackpool, but other than that, he was actually great. And you can probably guess who took me in and looked after me while I was there. It's not an accident he coined the expression, football is the glue. Thank you for everything, Todd, Maddie and Amanda. Which brings me back to Middlesbrough, back to Saltburn, back to the North Sea coast where so much of this story began. One of my favourite clips in this entire film is this one, me on Saltburn Beach with a football, a new Middlesbrough shirt, pretending to be Johnny Howson, the same beach where my grandpa once pretended to be Wilfie Mannion. In the 1980s, my dad waited in the Vancouver suburb of New Westminster for the visit of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who he gave flowers from his mum's garden. And 37 years later, the Queen wrote to my grandpa to congratulate him on reaching his century. Not bad going for a lad who once stood on the workhouse end dreaming about Middlesbrough Football Club. My family's story stretches from Teesside to Canada and back again, from Ayresome Park to BC Place, from Wilfie Mannion to Johnny Howson, and from my grandpa to my dad, and lastly from my dad to me. 3 generations, the Boro, Canada, football way. It's always the glue.